Hello everybody, welcome to Oscar Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already and drop a like on this video. I am trying to hit 100k subscribers and we're very nearly there, so your subscription would be much appreciated. So this is going to be the recap of day one of the NBA play-in. We of course got the Miami Heat versus the Atlanta Hawks and most recently the Los Angeles Lakers versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm going to go ahead and start with the Miami Heat Hawks game just because that's the less interesting one of the two. Pretty much everybody that I talked to pretty much thought that the Heat were going to win this game. Now, of course, by the nature of the play-in, any team can win really, because even in the NBA, the worst team can beat the best team depending on the night. And while I do believe the Miami Heat were a better team than the Atlanta Hawks definitely had their number tonight. And what's interesting is that they did this primarily through a team effort and really relying on their depth and, not just having Trae Young do everything, which frankly, based on how the Atlanta Hawks have played historically, that's kind of how it's been. And I think maybe in my analysis, when I made it clear that I thought that the Heat probably were almost certainly going to win this, as most confident as you can be with it being single elimination, is I guess their coach just has done more things than I expected. Now, there was a lot of talk about this being particularly unique to the Hawks, so, I guess I just didn't really think that they could, the Hawks coach really had this in him, and he clearly displayed that to be the case. I would give them credit for the defense because they definitely had a lot of good defensive stuff, particularly Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu. Combined, they finished with 6 blocks, with Onyeka getting 4 of them in just 19 minutes of action. They were really good in the interior with rebounding as well. Clint Capella finished with 21 rebounds, and even Jalen Johnson had 7 in 14 minutes. And if you take a look at their scoring, it's super evenly distributed. They had 7 players finish in double figures. 7 out of the 9 players who were in the rotation. So that's pretty freaking phenomenal. It was definitely very much a team effort. Miami side of things, what I was going to say was, even though I will give them some credit for their defense, Miami's offense was really pitiful here. Not that it's necessarily the biggest surprise. They were ranked 25th in offense this year, but what they have going down just foundationally does not work anymore. Not that it ever worked particularly great. Miami was not a great offense really at any point in this Jimmy Butler era, and they certainly are not right now, and it clearly showed. If you did not see my play-in prediction, first of all, sorry I didn't acknowledge the background's different because I did in that video. But second of all, I pointed out that Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo have been great versus the Atlanta Hawks this year. And yet, that did not transpire in this game. Jimmy Butler had 21 points and Bam Adebayo had 12. Jimmy getting his 21 points on 19 shots. Bam shooting 5 for 12, which is 42%. They both played pretty bad. Ironically, a player that I neglected to even mention in my play-in preview because I did not think he would be a factor at all, given that he hasn't been a factor at all for the Heat over the last year. Kyle Lowry, the corpse of Kyle Lowry, came alive and had 33 freaking points, and that was really big for Miami and was really the reason that it felt like they had a chance to win this game at points. But I think it says a lot about this team that they got this outlier performance from Kyle Lowry, to the 10th degree outlier. Super unlikely for him to score 33. If I had to bet, I would say he probably hadn't scored 30 in the regular season. I'm not going to fact check that. Maybe my editor can, but pretty sure that hasn't happened. They had this outlier game from him and still lose by 11 points. The Heat don't look great, and as a Chicago Bulls fan, the prospect of facing them in the second round of the play-in, I'm not as scared of it as I probably should be. Because the Heat, for a million reasons, should be a better basketball team, but I don't know if they are. Maybe my words will hurt me there, and it'll come back to bite me, but they don't look very good. And I'm really not sure how much longer they need to be doing this. But credit to the Hawks, I clearly did not give them enough of that credit. in the play-in video because I said they would lose both rounds. But yeah, they are now officially the 7th seed. Unfortunately, I'm not expecting the Hawks versus Celtics to be a particularly interesting or close series, but I guess we'll see if this new look Hawks team can actually do some damage, because if they apply the game plan they had in this game, they're not going to beat the Celtics, but it might not be just a complete non-series. But with that said, let's move on to the more interesting and weird and both good and terrible game of the night that was the Lakers versus the Timberwolves. This was definitely a very odd performance. This was a very weird game for a variety of reasons. We could start with the Minnesota Timberwolves. They looked really, really good out of the gate, and if you take a look at the box score, they had a lot of guys have good performances. Karl-Anthony Towns was pretty great for most of the game, and Mike Conley was great the whole game. Now, Anthony Edwards, if you look at that box score, you will see that 3 for 17, which is 17% from the field, 0 for 9 from 3. He had a horrid game. Got 2 buckets in overtime, but by then it was far too little too late. Just an absolutely no-show performance by Anthony Edwards, which was not something that I expected. And mind you, he put up those numbers in 43 minutes of action. Just probably the worst game of his NBA career. He maybe had a game worse statistically in his rookie year, but given the context, that's probably the worst game of his career. But they did get great performances from Taurean Prince and Kyle Anderson up to a point. Nickeil Alexander-Walker was actually pretty excellent in the minutes that he played. Jaylen Nowell was pretty good. Pretty much everybody came to play except for Anthony Edwards and Kyle Anderson in the clutch and Cat in the clutch. Not great, especially Kyle Anderson, but really, this is an issue I've had with the Timberwolves over the years, an issue I've had with Karl-Anthony Towns, and I've always been mixed on who I really blame here, but Karl-Anthony Towns shot the ball 12 times in this game. Understand, Karl-Anthony Towns is a generational offensive talent at his position. Like, regardless of what you feel about him as a player overall, his skill set at the center position to just simply put the ball in the basket is unlike basically any other player to ever play his position. He is somebody that should not be third in shot attempts, with 2 other players being just 1 field goal attempt behind tying him. Cat was barely used, if at all, to close this game and in overtime. For some reason, they decided to start going to Anthony Edwards, who had been cold the entire night. Now, I don't know if this is because of the coaching, or if it's because Cat just doesn't have that aggressiveness in him, if it's because Anthony Edwards hogs the ball. I don't think it's really that one, but who knows? It's some mix of all of them maybe. But yeah, Lord, I just don't feel good about how Cat was used in this game and how he's used by them pretty regularly. It is not abnormal for Cat to be used for a large chunk of the game, and then the offense just decides, we're good on you for a while in the worst moments. And at a certain point, you got to blame the player for shying away for the moment, but also it's very clear that the offense does not revolve around Cat to a degree that I think it definitely should. But with that mentioned, let's go ahead and move to the Lakers side of things. They went down big in this one for a while, obviously. Initially, LeBron James was not having a great performance, but he was okay. But really, the guy who was lagging behind was Anthony Davis. And of course, also D'Angelo Russell was pretty pitiful in this one, going 1 for 9 and only playing 24 minutes because he was ruled to just be not the best option to have on the floor. Instead, it was Dennis Schroeder, who had his potential game winner ruined by Anthony Davis. We'll talk about that in a second. But as a whole for the Lakers, it wasn't so much that they were playing awful. I think they were playing okay, and the Timberwolves out of the gate were playing fantastic. Probably something I didn't stress enough when specifically focusing on the Timberwolves was that they were really hot on offense to start, like really, really, really hot. Like I think over 50% from three, like around 60% from the field in the first half. They came to play scoring the ball initially really, really well. In fact, they were also passing the ball really well. I think I saw a graphic pop up at one point that said of their 27 made field goals at that point in the game, the Timberwolves had gotten 22 assists. It's a pretty good ratio. And when you compared that to what the Lakers were doing offensively, which was not very team oriented and more ISO ball from AD and LeBron, it was definitely interesting to see that dichotomy play out. But as the game progressed, it's almost as if the roles reversed. And towards the third quarter, it really seemed like the offense started to slow down. And in the fourth quarter especially, they went on a huge scoring drought. I believe it was almost 5 minutes, if not more, without scoring the ball. And the Lakers offense was not great in that moment. The Timberwolves didn't lose this game because of their defense, which to me is crazy given that Rudy Gobert and Jaden McDaniels did not play. To give them credit, Kyle Anderson's defense, Cat's defense was pretty freaking excellent this entire game to make up for that void of losing their two best defensive players. Two guys who, one of them should probably be all defensive and the other is just not going to make it because there's better candidates and he didn't make games. But you know, we know Rudy Gobert is a generational defensive player as much as people hate him. So losing those guys and still having a good defensive performance, that part was impressive, but the offense was really carrying them. And when the offense wasn't coming, the defense wasn't good enough to completely hold off the Lakers, even though they were doing a pretty good job. And ultimately, they were able to make the comeback. LeBron hit a super clutch three and then eventually made the drive, dish to Dennis Schroeder in the corner, who hit the three-pointer to win the game, and all was said and done. Oh, no, wait, Anthony Davis was a dumbass and fouled Mike Conley in the corner on a three-point attempt. It was very bad. AD self-admittedly after the game, like he apologized to Dennis Schroeder for ruining his game winner. Potentially a very serious mistake, but they did go into overtime. AD played really good in that overtime. As I mentioned earlier on in the game, AD was struggling. He started to turn it around later. It looked like he was going to finish with less than 20 as he had the last three games that he played, but he finished with 21 points, or 24 points, as well as 15 rebounds, 3 blocks, 2 steals, and 4 assists. So ultimately, a really good performance from AD, who turned his poor early shooting around. And he played good and made up for that. I was really afraid for the Lakers going into it because making a mistake like that very often will demoralize a team and they are just not going to show up to overtime. Like, to think of something similar, because there were some people making this comparison, like when J.R. Smith did what he did in the 2018 finals, like, you knew going into that overtime they were deflated and there was just no way that they were going to pull away with that one. But anywho, that's my thoughts on the first 2 games of the play-in. Be here tomorrow when I talk about the next 2 games. And for the playoffs, there's going to be 2 videos a day during the first round, covering the first 2 games of the day and then the last 2. So there's going to be a lot of content around here. And if you're new, again, subscribe so you can see it. Also, I did a more elaborate, in-depth play-in discussion over on my podcast. And in general, I think more people should go check out that podcast, not only out of my own self-interest, but I think it's a good podcast. It deserves more viewership separate from my own bias. If I wasn't on it and someone could do my role adequately enough, Alex Hoops and Rudy are very good at podcasts. I'm just also there. Anyways, that's it. Enough self-advertising. Goodbye.